Let's talk about the next three layouts that are available inside of our Preferences dialog box, starting with the Type layout right here. I'm going to click on that, and what that's going to do is that's going to bring up the Type options in my Preferences dialog box. I have a number of checkboxes that are listed here by default. The first one is Use Typographer's Quotes, and you'll notice that one's selected. What typographer's quotes are is the difference between the straight up and down quote characters that you'll see on your keyboard and typographer's quotes, where you have that little ball at the bottom and the curlicue goes up for opening quotes, or a little ball at the top where a curlicue comes down when you're closing quotation marks, setting type in your InDesign documents. Now, you have the option to choose back and forth between them with special characters that are available in your Type pull-down menu. So when you need to change back and forth for using those up and down characters, say for inch or foot measures, when you're setting type, you can actually switch back and forth and do that. I'll leave that option on as a matter of course. Type tool converts frames to text frames. What this does is if you have an empty frame set inside your InDesign document, allows you to select your Type tool and click inside it, and what it'll automatically do is convert that content option to be a text frame and show your flashing cursor so you can type inside of it. We'll leave that selected as well. Automatically use correct optical size. When I select this, what it does is it allows me to use the best sizes I'm working with that are my default sizes, as I've got that built inside my InDesign documents. We'll leave that on as well. Triple click to select a line. That option's selected here as well. You may remember in the first exercise when I was demonstrating options for selecting text that if I clicked the mouse button quickly 1, 2, 3 times or triple clicked, that it would highlight an entire line of type. The reason that happens is because this checkbox is selected by default in my Preferences dialog box. If I turn that off, that option wouldn't be available. What it doesn't say is that turning that off would also not allow me to select an entire paragraph by quadruple clicking or clicking 1, 2, 3, 4 times, very quick on the mouse button, to select that entire paragraph, or to select an entire text thread by quintuple clicking, or clicking 5 times very quickly on that mouse button. We're going to leave that option selected. Apply leading to entire paragraphs. If I have that option selected, what it would do is it would allow me to click inside a single paragraph anywhere, and whatever leading value that I change it to would change that for the entire amount of text in between returns, and we're set for that. We may choose to use different options for that, say to cheat superscripts or subscripting, or to cheat sizing between individual lines for display type, to give us unique packing or shifting to make a more even type color. We're going to leave that option off by default. Adjust spacing automatically when cutting and pasting words. We're going to leave that option on because this basically deals with justification settings that are built inside of this. If I leave that adjust spacing automatically, what it does is when I cut a word or I place a word or characters inside of it, InDesign will automatically recalculate the copy fit in between individual characters so it looks nice and it looks consistent. The font preview size is set by default for medium. We can make that large or small, and I'll show you what that looks like by selecting the large option just to make it easy to see and say OK. When I do that and I go to my Type pull-down menu and I select font, it gives me larger samples of the individual characters here that I can use for kind of a preview for what that type would look like. The larger that is, the easier it is for me to see when I'm working with on the fly, when I'm setting type or I'm picking fonts working with my InDesign documents. Let me deselect away from there. I'm going to use the Control-K keyboard shortcut to reopen my Preferences dialog box. If you're working on a Mac, your keyboard shortcut, as I said before, is going to be Command K. Let me go back to Type. Beneath that Options box for font preview size, we have a subset that shows the number of recent fonts to display, and that's set as 10. What that means is, when I'm using individual fonts inside of my InDesign document, the application is going to remember the last fonts that I've used or set or reset when I'm working in that InDesign document. So instead of having to scale all the way up and down through a long thread of fonts, the more of them I have, the longer that thread's going to be, it's going to remember at the very top of that submenu which fonts I've used, in this case the last 10 of them, and allow me to select those options very quickly at the top instead of having to scroll all the way up and down through all the fonts that I have open when I'm working with InDesign documents. And I have this checkbox that allows me to sort recent font lists alphabetically. What that would do is, instead of showing the last 10 fonts that I've used in my InDesign document in the sequence that I've placed them, is it would sort them A to Z for that number of fonts that I'm showing in my number of recent fonts to display edit box. Drag and drop text editing. This works very similar to how drag and drop would work in a word processing program like, say, Microsoft Word, where I can highlight some text, hold the mouse button down and literally grab that, place my cursor where I'd want to put that text and put it in to cut and paste. If you feel comfortable working that way, instead of selecting something and using the Edit Cut command or Command or Control X to cut that text, put your cursor where you want it, and go Edit Paste or use the keyboard shortcut Command or Control V to place it, you can select that to work with Layout View or for the Story Editor. If you don't feel comfortable with that, all you have to do is turn those options off, and you won't be able to do that drag and drop text editing, whether you're designing to do that or it's just happening by accident. I personally leave those options off, but we'll go back to the Enable in Story Editor default just to have that set. Smart Text Reflow basically allows me to set up how text will flow into an InDesign document if I don't have enough pages set to hold the entire thread of text. Let's go back to that book manuscript example that I was talking about at the start of this chapter of our InDesign course. If I had, say, a 600-page book, I may not want to go through the drill of setting those pages individually. What I could do is I could go to Add Pages to the end of story. When I use Smart Text Reflow, what it would do is, if I needed an extra page to place that entire text thread, it would automatically create that and fill it in. And it would keep doing that until it gets to the end of the story, in this case, flowing that text thread. I could also set that to parameters that match up with my page layout as opposed to the text that I'm flowing in. So I could set it, for example, to set to the end of a section or to the end of a document. We're not going to change that. We'll leave the default right there. Limit the primary text frames means that it will only allow that for primary text frames that I've already set up when I first built that InDesign document, or that I can switch to if I go back to my document layout options working in the File pull-down menu after I've created that document. Preserve facing page spreads and deleting empty pages basically gives me options for how that text is going to flow in based on layouts that I've already got built within my InDesign document. Let's go to the Advanced Type layout here. And when I do that, this shows the rules that we have available for setting superscript, so like 7 squared, subscript, as an example, for setting H2O, that 2 down there for subscript, or small caps that we talked about in the first lesson. So by default, the size for superscript is going to be 58% of the original size. So that 7 squared, in this case, is going to be a little less than 60% as large as the 7 number that we have built for that superscript. The position is going to be moved up to the upper third of my leading slug, or my leading grid, as I've got that built. So that's going to push that up just a little bit higher when I've got that set for whatever leading setting I've got built in when I set 7 squared, that little 2, for the superscript in that type. The same settings are loaded for subscript. If I was working with, again, that example, H2O for the chemical symbol, the 2 would be set in subscript. 58% of the original size of the H and the O, it'd be a little bit smaller for the 2, and then the position, 33.3%, would be setting that in the bottom third of my leading slug, or the leading grid. The 70% indicates that the small cap will be 70% of the size of a regular capital letter. Input method options. Use inline input for non-Latin text. So basically what this says is if I decided to place Cyrillic symbols, or I wanted to place a kanji or a Chinese Mandarin character inside that text area, it would allow me to set that inline so I could set those individual words in a sequence all the way across, as opposed to having to create a separate text frame for each of those individual characters. Let's go to the composition options. In this case, what we're doing is we're talking about how we set type and showing how we might have problems with that. The first section of this talks about highlighting. Keep violations. Basically, this talks about when we're setting our type styles, whether it conforms to the paragraph specifications for keeping, say, for example, the first 2 lines of a paragraph at the bottom of a page, or if it's too small, making that move up to the top of the next one. Substituted fonts. If you don't have the font included when you open an InDesign file, you don't have that open, or you don't even have it installed inside your system, what this would do is this would alert you that when you opened that InDesign document, you don't have that font available. H and J violations. H and J stands for hyphenation and justification. Basically, as you set your spacing parameters for that type, this will alert you if InDesign had to cheat beyond the rules and parameters that you originally set for that type to actually make it fit within your document, and let you know that that wasn't set the way you'd like, so you could find where that is and alter that if you choose to do it. Substituted glyphs. So for example, if I had batting, glyphs are TT, something that would fit a little bit close in between. It would show that if I had the glyph settings in, that it artificially put those 2 T's together. Or battle, the TTL. Glyphs actually artificially apply custom kerning for certain letter pairs or letter groups that basically make that type set a little bit tighter and a little bit more stylish. This would alert you to when that happened if that checkbox was selected. And custom tracking and kerning would let you see it be highlighted in a different letter anywhere in that text where you might have used custom rules to set the type beyond what the original copy fitting parameters were for working with that type. Sometimes you'll use tighter tracking and kerning to make a big headline packed very tightly. Selecting that would alert exactly where that happened if you'd applied those effects. Text wrap. Basically, this deals with those options where we were talking about in the first chapter of our InDesign course, where we take a graphic and we place it over a text frame. Text wrap options basically set an offset area to where that text will be pushed away from whatever graphic elements or frames are set up above it. We can set options for justifying text next to an object. So what that would do is it would set even margins left and right. We'll leave that off by default because if I'm setting ragged right or ragged left type, I don't want it to automatically change those rules to fit around that text wrap offset area. Skip by leading, which means if I have conflicts, it's going to read that by whatever leading rules or leading slug I have set for that line by line. And text wrap only affects text beneath. What that means is if this option was selected, that text wrap would only occur if that graphic element or frame was set above a text frame for the text wrap. If the text was set above whatever that graphic was with the text wrap, in that case, there wouldn't be a text wrap set and available. We'll leave the default setting just as it is right here.